It's great to be here. This is just going to be an hour training, so it's going to be pretty simple, but hopefully it will be worth your time. Let me go ahead and share my screen here so we can get started. Basically, we're just going to learn about the three main parts of children's neurology, and it really applies for infants all the way up to teenagers. It really applies to everyone. It really goes all the way up to my parents, actually. So we're going to talk about engaging the different parts of neurology, understanding the sequence of neurobiology. So why parenting, and once you understand sort of the three parts of the neurobiology of a child's neurosystem, why you parent that a little bit differently, and then how actually all of this is the foundation for attachment and attunement. So I will tell you right now, I did not create any of this. I am the blessed recipient of all this information. I started out as a parent. I have two boys. Ben is 15 and Nate is 12. And I started off as a very anxious and lost parent with my first son. And so I did everything wrong for the first few years. And through God's grace, I attended a training by Dr. Purvis called TBRI. And it changed everything for me. It changed the way that I related to my kids. It really salvaged my relationship with them. And so I just want to, everything that you're going to hear about today either comes from Dr. Purvis, Karen Purvis, Dr. Bruce Perry, Dr. Daniel Siegel. There's a lot of really great information out there. I'm not always the best recalling where exactly it came from, but none of this is mine. I have just been very blessed. And so it's my humble opportunity to share what I've learned. I do this here at Gladney. I do this with our adoptive parents. We have a lot of trainings here, and so it's always fun to have outside people also join in this conversation. I have a master's in counseling from UNT. I'm a licensed professional counselor or supervisor in the state of Texas. And it's funny because I went through my master's in counseling at UNT, which was an incredible program. It was about 10 years ago. And the word neurobiology, neurochemistry, trauma, none of those words were used at all. And so this is really new stuff. Really, it's come into the field within the last, I'd say, 10 years, and it's just transformed the way that we understand ourselves and our clients and the kids we work with and our own children. And so it's just exciting time to see how all of this information is coming and how applicable it is to everyday life, and not only with our jobs, but with our relationships and the way we interact with people. So it's just something that I hold very dear, and I'm grateful that I get to share with you. So this is a training where we're going to start to see that the neurobiology system is actually more complex than just the frontal cortex. And the problem is, and this is where it gets complicated, is that the way that we are created is that all the information actually has to go from the bottom up. That it actually comes through our body, goes through systems in our brain, and then ends up in the frontal cortex. And so we actually could, when we're parenting from the top down, we actually are actually working against the system, because you're actually not working with the way that we're created, which is actually that neurology starts from the outside and it works its way in. And so let's talk really quickly about the three main systems. This is such a travesty that I'm explaining the complexity of the brain with three main systems. Dr. Bruce Perry says these models are a joke because they are so simplistic with complex, something that is so complex. But for those of us who are not neurologists, and those of us who are just, getting the normal average SAT scores, these systems and these models really help. They help me understand what I'm looking at. And it helps me simplify something that is so complex. So I'm going to go with it. I found these to be very helpful for me, and this is what Dr. Siegel uses. And there's a lot of great information out there that talks about sort of the three main systems. So what I want you to do, and I can't see you, and I hate that I can't see you, I want you to go ahead and put your hand up like this. So full class participation. If you don't do this, you don't get credit. I can't say that because obviously you could be, I don't know, washing your dog right now and we wouldn't know because we don't have you on camera. But if you will go ahead and put your hand up like this, and what I want you to do is I want you to wrap your finger inside your hand like this, and I want you to bring your fingers over, and then I want you to turn your hand like this. And this is a small little model of the nervous system. And so what you're looking at here, if you look at it, it's sort of like this is the front part of it, this is the front part, and then it works its way back down and it goes through the spinal cord. This is a small model of the nervous system. And I want you, let's start from the bottom. So this is kind of what the brainstem is. This is all the neurons that run through your body and connect to your arms, to your extremities, to your fingers. This is what you're using right now, the nerve system. That's what you're using right now to raise your hand if you're actually doing it. You're using nerves to raise your hand. And that basically is what takes in all the information that's occurring in the outside world. The breathing, it's also the part that does all of our survival. It's what we call, it's like the reptilian brain or the basement brain. This does all the breathing, the heartbeat, the movements, the bigger movements, the survival. All of this is part of a nervous system that is very, it's very old. It's very, it's part of our early survivalist part. It's what every animal has, is that brainstem nervous system that is basically interacting with the outside world, taking in all the information and is processing it. Now, in a human, what it actually does is it brings it up through, up into our cortex, and it actually processes the information, the sensory information. If you think about all the senses, so we're getting information through our eyes, we're getting information from our mouth, we're getting information from what we're hearing, from sounds, from sights, we're getting all this information, and it's all going to the back part of our brain where it's being processed. And then now we get to a very different part of our brain that is not in every single animal. And that's this middle section, which is your thumb. And it kind of sits behind your frontal cortex, kind of in the middle back here. And that's called the limbic system. And if you've heard about this, that's great. If you haven't, the limbic system is so important to understand, especially when you're talking about children or working with kids from hard places, or if you're a teacher or a counselor, you need to understand the limbic system. The limbic system is the emotional part of our brain. And the way that the limbic system is it has four parts: the hypothalamus, the thalamus, the hippocampus, and the amygdala. Those four parts basically are helping determine and making meaning of things in our life and determining what's safe, what's not safe. It incorporates our history, it incorporates our past. The way it works is it basically is like a soldier at the gate. And the soldier at the gate is basically taking in all this information through our body, and it's taking it to the limbic system. And the limbic system is saying, what does all this mean? So if you have an experience that's really, I don't know, let's say enjoyable, then all this sensory information goes to the limbic system, and the limbic system says, wow, this is really enjoyable. And it stores memories, and it has access to all of our memories, and it has access to the file cabinet of experience, which is stored through all of our gray matter, all of our memories and all that stuff. And basically it creates this enjoyable, okay, this is really fun. And then emotions start coming out of, this is enjoyable, this is fun, this is exciting, all these different things that are neurotransmitters that are running through our body that create sensations of euphoria, of pleasure, of fun, of happiness. If we experience something negative, then those neurons basically receive the information, they send it up through the brainstem, and then it hits our limbic system. And then all of a sudden, especially the amygdala, which is really the most important part, looks at, the amygdala receives this information, looks at the file cabinet of experience and says, this is not good, this is painful, or this is scary. And the way it looks is it looks at the file cabinet experiences is based on the experiences that I have had in my life. This is a scary thing, or this is a bad thing. And then what's really interesting is the limbic system actually has control of the parasympathetic and sympathetic nervous system. So if something is scary or if something is dangerous, then it has the ability to make us react into a fight, flight, or freeze response if we're in danger, or into, you can call it the freeze response. So we can either get alerted, which is the fight or flight, or we can actually get subdued, which is the freeze. Those are not the same thing. So if I'm facing something that's very dangerous and I'm about to fight or flight, then what happens is my limbic system will send out excitatory neurotransmitters, and it's actually done through hormones, will send out excitatory neurotransmitters through my body so that I will now fight whatever is scary, or I will flight, I will run. Or it will send inhibitory neurotransmitters through my body so that my nervous system will shut down and I will go into a freezing state, which Dr. Purvis talked about how it's almost like a seizure. I go into a seizing state that I clam up because I'm in a dangerous position. And all of that is occurring in the basement and the first floor of the neural system. So when you think about the brain of a child, there are massive systems that are very powerful that are occurring prior to it ever getting into frontal cortex territory. I mean, I'm talking, we're talking about eating, sleeping, digestion. We're talking about, body movements. We're talking about emotions, fear. We're talking about memories. What's implicit memory? What are things that, things that I do remember, things I don't remember, but they're still in there. All these things are occurring in my limbic system all the time. So a good example is I'm driving to work. I'm on 820, heading down 820 in the fast lane, listening to, I don't know, what's my music today? I'm listening to Elton John, let's say, listen to some old school Elton John. All of a sudden someone comes in from another lane with a car. My eyes see a car coming over on me. My eyes send all that information. It's processed. It goes to my limbic system. My limbic system then looks at the file cabinet of experience and says, if that car hits you, we are in danger. This is a problem. Let me send excitatory neurotransmitters through my body back to my arms, which will now steer away from the car that's about to hit me. I will steer away from them, and because that's my response for survival. And then based on that, I will then, once I'm safe, then what happens is, the way this works is, once the limbic system says it's safe, then the frontal cortex comes online. And then all of a sudden, after I'm safe, I say something like, oh my gosh, that guy almost hit me. Look how he came over. Or some of you may have more choice words or whatever you say, right? But that's because what actually happened is you functioned, all that happened here. It had nothing to do with your frontal cortex. Your frontal cortex was completely bypassed because your brain, for survival purposes, was like, no, we don't need that. We need to survive. So all that was done by your brain, but you didn't even make that decision. That was all done before. So we're talking about very powerful systems that a lot of times do things without even the frontal cortex comes online. I have an example. I remember I was in my house in Keller and I dropped a glass, like it was actually made of glass, and it had water in it. And of course, and I dropped it. And as it's dropping it, my reaction with things like that is I always like try to stop it with my foot. Like sometimes something's falling, I put my foot underneath it to stop it from breaking. I've done that a million times. Sometimes I feel like I'm such a genius. Look how great my reflexes are. I caught this literally, and of course I moved my leg into this falling glass and I shattered the glass against the cabinet. And now I've cut my leg because I now, for some reason, my limbic system decided that if a glass is falling, the best thing to do is to shove your leg and try to catch it against the counter. And of course I'm bleeding. It's not something that I consciously thought of. That was all limbic system. And then frontal cortex comes in. The frontal cortex is the smart part of your brain. It's the part of your brain that does chemistry. It's the part of your brain that believes in God. It's the mammalian brain, the mammal brain. It's what the chimpanzees have some part of a frontal cortex, but it's a really part of your brain, the part of your brain that is very intelligent, that uses humor. It's a part of your brain that uses language. So then, of course, I cut my leg. Then my frontal cortex comes online, and I say to myself, "Oh my gosh, what an idiot! I just cut myself. Like, why did I do that? That's so dumb." Well, that's because my frontal cortex now is coming online. So those three parts of our brain are functioning all the time, and it's functioning all the time, especially with children. These systems are part of our early makeup. In fact, the early part of a child really starts with the neurons really start off being very basic. And then as experiences happen, the neurons grow, and each neuron creates more dendrites and axons and actually expand into these neural networks. So by the time a child is 3, their brain has just exploded with neural growth. But a lot of this is these systems are part of our from childhood on. From the time we're born, these systems are growing. The frontal cortex, the funny things about these systems is brainstem is constantly growing, obviously, until you kind of go through puberty and you grow, your body grows, and you kind of develop. Limbic system gets real big in adolescence, and then it actually gets smaller in adulthood. So that's why teenagers have much more intense emotions. And frontal cortex is from a childhood just starts growing. And it actually doesn't stop growing until about the age of 25 is when it fully develops. So working with juveniles on probation and kids who are, 17, 18, and people are like, they're legally adults. Neurology says they're not an adult until 25. 25 is kind of the age where adult brain really takes over. And so anything before that is neurologically, they're still in that those developing ages. And so today, what I want to do is I just want to point some things out that will help us engage more current neurobiology research into our parenting. And the first thing I want to say is that parenting really needs to occur from the bottom up. That when we look at engaging children, or we look at engaging kids we work with, whether it's at school or whether it is, if you're juvenile probation, if you're a CASA worker, all that stuff, that really the best way to engage is from the bottom up. That you're working primarily starting with what we call brainstem or body, and then you transition into the limbic system and making sure that the limbic system is online, and then you get to the frontal cortex, which is where the teaching and traditional parenting comes in. And so why is that important? The reason it's important is because you don't have a choice. All of these systems occur in sequence. And so if you are trying to make an impact on a child and you're doing it from the top down, you're just wasting your time. You're not actually creating what we would call sustainable change, because sustainable change is something that's going to be a part of the entire system working through, and for it to be congruent, or what you call there needs to be connection. There needs to be where all the systems are in sync and are working together in the neurological network, so that you attain whatever goals it is, whatever it is that your deal is, right? If you're probation, you want the kid not to have, you don't want recidivism, right? Like you don't want them to break the law again. If you're a teacher, you want them to learn how to do math. If you're a CASA worker, you want them to learn how to stay in a placement successfully. Like whatever it is that your deal is on what you want to teach your kids, like the process on how you do that is you want to get to the frontal cortex. But how you get there and are you really getting there is kind of what we're going to be talking about today. We all want our kids to be kind to others. We all want them to be respectful. We all want them not to get in trouble. That's all frontal cortex stuff. But what I'm going to talk about today is how you get there so that it actually fits and actually stays. And so that's kind of where the bottom of parenting occurs. So hopefully this is clear to you guys. Hopefully it's not too complicated. I try to keep it pretty simple. Primarily for myself too, because if I get too complex, I'm like, wait, what does that even mean? How do I explain it? So, okay, so let's spend some time on just the bottom floor. Let's talk about the basement. So this is something that I have learned so much about as a parent ever since I started learning more about neurology, of the actual crucial part of starting with the body and the brainstem in mind. This is sort of what you call the empowering part, the getting the body in sync. And so when you look, I'm going to kind of make this a little bit more challenging in the sense that a lot of times when we look at a kid who's misbehaving, we immediately jump into, hey, don't do that, da, 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 da. So let's imagine a kid is misbehaving. Picture your child misbehaving in front of you. They're doing something that drives you nuts. They're making a mess. They're screaming at you. They're spitting at you. They're cussing at you. If they're, a teenager, they're slamming the door, all that stuff. And in this moment that you are now faced with this misbehavior, the first thing I want you to ask yourself is, what's going on with their body? Is their body okay? So now when I do this, I start going down my mental checklist. I'm like, okay, when's the last time, I'm just gonna use my son. How did he sleep last night? Okay, what did he eat? When's the last time he ate? What's the last time, has he had any water? Is there anything going on with his body that would maybe make him feel like unhappy or discomfort? One of the fascinating things about our bodies is that our bodies truly are the first line of defense. Our senses, the way that we engage the world, is really the first part of how we process all this information. One of the things they went into they did some research, Dr. Purvis talked about this. They did some research on kids who were getting in trouble at schools, and they found that kids in urban schools were getting in more trouble than kids in rural schools. And so they said, of course, that has to do with socioeconomic reasons, and that has to do with finances, and the inner city schools don't have the money. Well, what they actually found out is the reason why inner city schools, where kids were misbehaving more, is because those schools, the buildings were really, really old. And there was a lot of allergens and things that were creating lead paint and old, and mold and all these things that were creating children to have inflammation. And so now children were faced with inflammation, high histamine levels, were having trouble behaving in school because their bodies felt horrible. It's like all of us who now are, dealing with Omicron and we're sick. When you're sick, you just don't feel good. Well, if I'm in a situation where I'm looking at a child and their body is not in sync, they're not getting good nutrition. They're not getting hydration. They're not getting good sleep. They're not getting any good physical activity. Then the expectation that somehow they're going to be able to behave is ridiculous. It's unfair. That somehow I'm not going to pay attention to, are these children sleeping? We had a doctor from the Institute of Adoption come, the Minnesota Institute of Adoption come, and she said the number one thing that I have to make sure that these kids, these adoptive kids, she's worked with kids who've adopted internationally, she's worked with kids who adopted through foster care. She goes, the number one thing I have to make sure that these kids are doing is that they're sleeping. She goes, if they're not sleeping, we're not going to make any headway at all with these kids. She goes, I will have to prescribe. She goes, even if I have to prescribe, benzodiazepine, an Ativan to get this child, this 4 or 5-year-old to sleep, I have to start with sleep. If they're not sleeping, we're not making any progress. And so now you begin to see, like, there are foundations that we have to have in place to be able to then have expectations of how kids behave. And if we don't take care of the foundational stuff, then in some ways we're misunderstanding the way that neurology works. And so my wife and I have changed entirely the way that we parent. And the first thing we do is we really value sleep. We always have water bottles around us. We give our children vitamins every day. We do, and really the sky's the limit on what you can do to empower the body. We do probiotics, these things that I, as an early parent, thought were irrelevant, right? Like, who cares? It doesn't matter. Just make sure they're fed. Now I'm realizing, like, these things matter. We have stories of parents who have so much trouble with their kids. And I'm not going to tell you that this is for every kid. but they took them off of gluten. And all of a sudden, the kid's behavior changed completely. We have parents who have changed their diets, almost every kid needs to be in a physical activity. We have a lot of things that we dismiss in the child welfare as being irrelevant or unimportant, or what, it's just is what it is. Like, they're being fed, they look healthy, it's fine. We don't understand how much the body matters. And then we get into senses. Sensory processing disorder is basically where a child has not had the ability to neurologically create healthy pathways from their senses to their brain. So now they don't process the information the same way. Sensory processing disorder could be that the neurons are either very fragile, so they get very overwhelmed very quick, which trigger the amygdala to react because I'm overwhelmed, or they're insulated. They don't pass the information enough. So a child has to do a lot of something to get it. They have to have a lot of sound, a lot of touch. They have to do a lot of things to be able to feel it, to sense it, to taste it. And so they are constantly seeking, want, because that makes them feel good, but in the process, driving everyone crazy around them. But that's all body related. And so that's not even getting to, so we're looking at, see, the problem with all of this is the iceberg, the tip of the iceberg is bad behavior. But what we're not looking at is everything that's occurring underneath. And so in this case, the body is huge. One of the things that my wife and I we added was the sensory diet. This comes from the book, The Out of Sync Child. And basically the sensory diet says every child, and now I believe every teenager, and really probably every adult, needs some form of food and play and rest within 2 hours. So most of the time when kids get in trouble is because they're either hungry, they're tired, or they're bored. And so if a child's hungry, we need to make sure that we're feeding them. If a child is tired, we need to give them the opportunity to rest. If a child is bored, we need them to get the opportunity to get some energy into their bodies. And so the sensory diet sort of says, hey, if you want to really empower this body, you need to create these sequences where you're engaging the body through food, play, and rest. So go back to the concept of here's my child freaking out and they're screaming at me and they're being inappropriate and they're using cuss words and whatever. And I need to be like, okay, is he hungry? Is he tired? Is he bored? Like, what's happening here that's creating this? Is it possible that this is a body issue? I'll tell you a quick story and then we'll move on from body. But I remember I was with a family friend and they have kids that are younger than my kids. This happened just a couple of years ago. So these kids are like, I don't know, 5 and 7. And I know that these kids have some behavioral issues. And so I know that, I'm just expecting that. So we go to dinner, actually we go to breakfast with them. And so, we're ordering breakfast and we're at a nice breakfast place. And so my kids look at me and they're like, hey, Dad, can I get, a pancake or French toast? I'm like, you can get that, but then we're probably not going to do orange juice. And you also need to get a protein. So I'm like, if you want to get a pancake or French toast, that's fine, but you also have to get protein, and orange juice just is fructose. It's just more sugar. So I'm like, we're not going to do that, right? So I'm managing. Like, my parenting now is about managing the body, about making sure they're sleeping well, making sure they're eating well, making sure I'm being very proactive about all these things, because I don't want to end up in a position where we've missed the window and now the kid's messed up and is angry and frustrated, or my son's yelling, like just normal parenting stuff. And so my kids are like, fine, I want a pancake and I want, 3 eggs and bacon and I'll drink milk. So I'm like, great, no problem. Well, these kids who we know have had behavioral problems were actually acting pretty decent at the time. But they're like, Mom, Dad, we want French toast and pancakes and we want orange juice. And the parents are like, yeah, that's great. Go ahead, get French toast and pancakes. And I'm thinking, that's just, in like my brain now, I'm like, that's just carbs. There's your pancake. You got a little eggs in there, but not much. And then they're gonna put syrup on it. That's just more sugar. And then they're gonna get orange juice, which is just fructose. I'm like, there's no protein in there. I'm like, this is a recipe for disaster. Now, I'm not saying this, of course, because that would be rude. Be like, wait, don't you want them to have protein? But whatever, okay. So sure enough, they get it, they order, they eat it, we're doing fine. And in my mind, I'm literally now thinking like, I wonder when this is gonna all fall apart. So sure enough, they eat. And then of course we, the parents, are all talking and we're discussing different stuff. And sure enough, they start bickering on down on the side, where the kids are, and they're bickering and starting to fight, and then and of course something spills, and then now it's a big thing, and everybody starts yelling. And then the parents are, of course, are like, hey, why can't you behave better? You know, blah, 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 blah. And I just want to grab the table and I want to throw it in the air and be like, are you kidding me? You just loaded them up with sugar. You just gave them carbs. You didn't pay any attention to their protein. Like, this is not their fault. This is your fault. You did this. Pay attention. Like, you can't do this. You can't give them. And so, like, number one, let me tell you, what a child needs and what they say they need are not the same thing. Okay. So like, yeah, if I let my child run their sensory diet, they'll be playing video games all day long and eating corn chips, right? So like, I'm not saying that we give the children what they want. I'm saying we pay attention to their body and we give them what they need. In fact, the reality is that knowing what you want is frontal cortex stuff. And so most of us actually don't even know what our body needs. That's called integration. Integration says that my frontal cortex is paying attention to my limbic system, and my frontal cortex is paying attention to my body, that I begin to listen to, through mindfulness, what my body is telling me, and I pay attention to it, and I respond accordingly to meet the needs of my body. That's high-end frontal cortex stuff. That is a very developed person that has the ability to really pay attention and say, my body needs rest, I'm going to take rest. Or my body needs sleep, or my body needs activity, I'm going to pay attention to that. Most of us weren't really good at that. And so we just say, my body needs peanut butter, and my body needs, a glass of milk. That's what I think. Like, if I don't feel good, I want peanut butter on something and milk. But I have had to learn to integrate the systems. A child has no way to do that. So sure enough, easy example of how we're not engaging children's bodies correctly. And sure enough, it all falls apart. So if you have any questions about the body, put that in the chat. Let's move on, because I want to make sure we can get to all of this before our time runs out. So now, if I can look at my child and say, okay, they slept well last night, they're not sick, there's nothing going on. Okay, hold on. If I go to, they're tired, they're sleepy, they're hungry, I need to stop and fix the body first. So I think that's pretty clear, but I just want to make sure I say that. Like, then my kid's yelling at me and all this stuff, and I'll be like, when's the last time you ate? And he's like, I don't know. I said, oh man, I can see you're hungry. I'm like, okay, let's feed you first, and let's have this conversation after you eat. When's the last time you slept? Like, did you sleep well last night? And if he's like, I don't feel good, I'm tired, or a lot of times then they'll be like, I'm sleepy, and I'm talking more like younger kids, but those are things that if I'm in a situation and I realize like this body is not being empowered, I need to pause the process and take care of the body. I can't move on into the other systems and be like, I may go back later and be like, you said some really hateful things when you called me fat, even though I'm fat, like that hurts my feelings, you shouldn't have said that. But like, that's later. I'm gonna do that later, because first of all, I need to get this child fed. If they're having, digestion. So what's really fascinating about neurology is this is what we call the brain. The second brain is actually our digestion system. Our digestion system has so many neurons in it. It's actually known as the second brain. And so when a child is stressed out, their neural system, it will include their digestion. If a child's really, really upset about something, they usually will have diarrhea. Or they may be constipated. And so that's where stuff like some sort of digestive medication can be helpful. Anything that can help digestion is good. Making sure you're feeding your kids. So if it's a body issue, solve the body issue. Okay, now let's say you get to a point you're like, okay, the body seems to be okay. I feel like we met all the requirements, they've had some play, this is something else. Then you move up, because remember, we're parenting from the bottom up. we're moving into now the limbic system. And the limbic system is more the emotional side of the brain. And so this is where I'm going to now pay attention to a child and say, okay, are they having an emotion? Is this an emotional issue? Now, here's what's crazy about the limbic system. And here is what is so fascinating and complicated about it. The limbic system is nonverbal. It is a nonverbal system. And so when I'm looking at my child, it's very important that I recognize that they may be facing and dealing with an emotion that they have not processed or they understand. So there may be something that's getting caught in the limbic system. We had a situation just recently where someone called and said, my child ran away. And I'm like, okay, that's horrible. What's going on? And we're like, we don't know. And then of course we do some backup work, and then we find out, oh, there was a really bad interaction with biological family that week. That happened a week prior. Biological family had come into the picture for a very temporary situation. It did not go well. The child carried that in the limbic system, was never able to express it, but carried it. The parents were unaware. They knew that had happened, but they were, checking in, maybe they're okay. And then of course, that stayed there, wasn't resolved, and then the child ran away. So at the end of the day, it's okay, we got to go back. Obviously, something happened that got stuck there, an emotion, something that is fear-based. It could be anything that's emotional. The three sort of deadly emotions for kids who come from hard places is fear. The second one is shame, right? And the next one is grief. These are all extremely powerful emotions that we as a society have not done a good job of allowing the space for people to safely feel the emotions of fear, the emotions of shame, the emotions of grief. And so often when our kids are struggling, let's say they get embarrassed at school, they're not going to come to you and say, someone made fun of me at school and I felt embarrassed. For my younger son, he's not as physical in sports as some of the kids in his class, and all the kids in his class are like super athletes. And so that's hard for him. My younger son has that sense of shame, but he would never be able to fully come to me and say, Dad, I feel shame because I'm not as athletic as some of the other kids. So that's in his system, but it hasn't been voiced. It hasn't been expressed. And so my job as a parent is to say, okay, I see this really bad behavior, or I see this, but is there something that's occurred in this child's life that has created an emotional undercurrent, something that's happening underneath the surface that potentially could be impacting him now? And I recognize, because neurologically it's not frontal cortex, he's not going to be able to use words to explain it. It's not going to be something that someone can just talk about, because that requires that communication, that requires the integration that children do not have, to be able to say, I got yelled at work. Yeah, I'm pissed. Sorry, Kristen, my wife, that I yelled at you. I'm actually frustrated about something that happened. That's integration. That's high level neurology. But for children, they don't know that. And so there's all this stuff that doesn't even have a name. I don't even know what it is, but it makes me, see, isn't that funny? I literally just became nonverbal when I went to my limbic system, because it's just stuff. My older son, he's 15 now, and he's starting to get into, relationships. Does he like a girl? Does he not? And right before the Christmas break, a relationship with a girl he liked, she started to ghost him. She started to not communicate with him. And so, right at the beginning of Christmas break, which was horrible because there was no resolution. And so my wife and we started saying, like, I think she may be done. Like, I think she liked you, but she doesn't anymore. It's okay. And he kept saying, no, I think there's more to this. I don't know what's going on, da, 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 da. Well, regardless of what it was, he had a lot of that stuff over the Christmas break. A lot of the confusion, a lot of, we kind of knew what it was because we have integration. We understand what the emotions are. but he didn't. And so what we had was a cranky child. He's as tall as me. He's 15, but he's taller. He's like 6'1". He's a big kid. And so, but yet he doesn't have the ability. And so here we are, we know what's happening. We know it's caught in his limbic system. We know that he's either angry or disappointed or embarrassed. And I kid you not, it was like, and if we talked about it, it was like, I don't want to talk about it. Why are you always bringing this up? Because it's like, we know why you're cranky. We know why you're having disobedience, and it's not okay, but we know we're getting stuck. And so it's funny how I'm talking about like, hey, if it's in the limbic system, pay attention to it. Yeah, even if you figure it out, it's in the limbic system, it's not easy to get there. It takes a lot of patience and a lot of emotional space to say to a child, what is going on? What happened? Is there something that you're experiencing? What are you feeling? What does it feel like? And so what you're doing is you're trying to create that integration of, tell me what's happening in this middle, in this middle level, in this in this middle floor. Tell me what that experience feels like. After Christmas break ended, and school started again, it was pretty clear pretty quickly that the relationship had ended, that she was actually interested in another person. And so my son then was able to literally come to us and say, I'm angry, I'm mad. And we're like, yay, like, wow, yes, we're mad too. Let's tell me what this feels like, and now all of a sudden the limbic system has this freedom to express itself. And now there's integration. And sure enough, man, he's expressed it within a couple of days, like we're kind of back rolling again. And that's hard. It doesn't make it easier. But now there's not this underground current. And so when you're looking at a child who is acting out, and they have a tough past, or they're challenging, man, that limbic system is on high alert. That limbic system is taking over all the time and creating fight, flight, or freeze responses based on fear experiences from the past. That children a lot of times have strong emotions. And so, we have to give space, emotional space, for these experiences that these kids are having. And the thing that I just think of as being so important is just creating integration for them of like, what is the experience? Now, let me tell you why this is so hard, is because what you're asking me to do, Bill, is when a kid is being a jerk to me, that I have to somehow not take it personally and not be like, how dare you talk to me that way? You will show me respect, which I'm sure you deserve respect. That's fine. And I have to be like, hey, what's going on? Like, yeah, last week you were okay, but all of a sudden now you're yelling at me. What's happening? Did something happen? Did something occur? Is there something that's bothering you? And if they don't tell me the first time, I got to chill and wait and process and be patient with them as they work through this. And you're telling me that it could take like time for them to understand what their emotions are, and I have to work through it with them? Yes, that's exactly what I'm saying. That traditional parenting gives no space for this. It gives no space for disrespectful behavior and consequence. We are going to do this. And this neurological stuff says, hold on a second. Pay attention to what's happening below the surface, because all you're getting is top of the iceberg behavior. What's happening beneath the surface? What's fascinating and what clarifies and confirms this theory is that I have been in this field for 20 some years, and every single probation officer, teacher, detention officer, police officer that I worked in the police department, every single one of them that was really effective in working with people understood this reality, that there is a value in connection, that there is a value in creating emotional space for what is occurring in the life of a child. I had mentors who had worked with kids, and they were so incredible at saying, hey, you're doing this, and that's not okay, but let's move aside. Tell me what's really going on. And I kid you not, if you spend the time and you really honestly, from your limbic system, become vulnerable to a child, you will hear stories and situations that will completely floor you. that the emotions and the pain that these children are carrying, stories of parents who are going through divorce, of parents who may be dying from cancer, stories that literally, if you really listen to the narrative and really pause, and it's not even verbal, it's about being present with them and giving them that safe place to say, I'm going to connect to you. It's funny, it's what I'm starting to call it, game recognizes game. That limbic system recognizes limbic system. That I just am present and I say, oh, what is going on? What's happening? I see the behavior. Can we just sit down for a second and talk about what's going on under the surface? Because I see it, I sense it. What is it? Like, do you even know? Did something happen? Do you know when you started feeling this way? Do you even know what you're feeling? Can you, like, and I'm just going to give you time and let's just sit here. I'm present. Like, I don't want to, I don't want to get into, like, tell me what it is. And then all of a sudden their limbic system experiences safety from our limbic system. That we say, we're not going to go into this, I'm going to get you in trouble, or I'm going to tell you what you're going to do, or I'm going to, be the authority over you. I'm going to give you this space. Now, some kids may choose not to go there, and that's okay. And then you may have consequences, or I don't know, you may have things, but at least you're providing that safe place. And you don't, this is not a, well, I'll give you respect, I'll give you respect as long as you give me respect, or, I'll do this as long as you do. No, like, give me a break. We're the secure base. We keep showing up safe. You never get I get it. Sometimes I screw up and I get angry and I blow with my kids, but then I never get to just walk away and be like, forget it, I'm not doing this anymore. That's ridiculous. When it's our responsibility, if we're going to work with kids, then sorry if they don't treat you the way you want to be treated and they're not respected the way you want to check. Like, you got to do your own work, and you come back to them with the same vulnerability every single time that says, I'm still here for you, even though you didn't do the 100 things I told you to do that would make your life better, and you basically disobeyed me from start to finish. Like, you drive me crazy. You deserve everything you get. Guess what? I'm still a vulnerable person here. I'm still in this room with you. I'm still in this place with you. And guess what? Today's a new day. You get a new chance for redemption, because I never know when the sun's going to shine and neurology is going to come online. And all of a sudden, you're going to catch and learn the things that I've been telling you, and all of a sudden you hear it, right? Because I'm telling my 14-year-old stuff, my 15-year-old stuff every day that he's not going to hear until he's 25. And guess what? I don't get to get hurt, or I get to get my feelings hurt, or feel like, oh, well, he's not listening to me, so I'm not going to start. No, I show up. I have to keep showing up. That's my responsibility. This is my part of me finding my own security outside of the fact that the kids listen to me or not. I come with the same vulnerability every time. If I don't have the ability to be vulnerable with the clients I'm working with, or my children, or whatever, then that's my responsibility to manage that. It is not their responsibility to earn the right for me to be kind to them. It is not their responsibility to earn the right for me to be vulnerable to them. That is not how that works. I am responsible for attachment. I am responsible for connection. I am the person who is the secure base. They are the recipients of it. They have no freaking clue how to do it. No one taught them how to do it. They have had no experiences. And so I may be the only person. Research says it only takes one person to provide a unconditional positive regard for a child, and it changes their experience. And dang it, it better be me. I better not be the person. And trust me, from the early work of working with juveniles on probation and my early work with addictions, I was as guilty as anybody of using shame, of using power, control, manipulation with the clients I worked with. I was horrible with it. I thought that was what being a good probation officer was, or being a good therapist was. And I just screwed up all the time. And I finally realized, like, I have got to make myself vulnerable. And I can't be somebody who is constantly creating these, if I can just manipulate them enough, if I can just force them, and it's almost like I'm creating, what I would call it now is what I was doing was, I knew that, like, an addiction, you get to you reach the bottom, right? Like you come to the bottom and then you see hope. And I was trying to accelerate that process. Like, oh, you're not going to do what I say? Well, then you will, you will face my, rage, or what word am I trying to use here? Like, you will get it because you're not doing what I say. And dear God, like I'm so mortified by the work I used to do, and understanding that I have to create the safe limbic space for them. And then when that happens, and it's done through playfulness and engagement and connection, and then when I meet those things, then I finally get to the frontal cortex side of it. Because now I've worked my way up. I've worked my way from the bottom up. And then I get to do whatever it is that you get to do. How you want to teach your kids how to, fold the laundry, or learn how to do their taxes, or learn how to play baseball, or anything that is your deal is now open, because you've met the body, you've met the limbic system. Conscious discipline is a teaching way that says, first you give them safety, then you give them connection, then you give them correction and teaching. First you have to be safe, then you have to connect with them, and then you get to do your teaching. And so that's basically the system of working from the bottom up. And then you get to behavior modification. And in behavior modification, if you really want to know neurologically how to do this, the thing about bad behavior is that I've learned now that bad behavior is not bad behavior. It's maladaptive behavior. There is a need that the child is trying to meet. The need is completely honorable and precious and holy. A child has a need of love, connection, physical, emotional. They have this need. They don't know how to meet it, and they've never been taught how to meet it correctly. So they use maladaptive skills to get it. Aggression, fighting, whatever it is, demanding, defensiveness. So they literally are using all these maladaptive skills to get it. And we, in traditional parenting, get mad at the way they do it. And we say, how dare you do this? Don't do it this way. Now you will face the consequence for approaching this bad. But the truth of the matter is, we don't ever address the need. The need gets hidden, gets put away. I will not go there anymore. And then the behavior continues. So the trick to it is, the need is there. The bad behavior is here. We see the bad behavior. We have to look at the need and say, hey, this behavior is not the right way to get what you want. Let me teach you a new way, a new path to get what you want, which is going to meet your need, whatever that need is. And if I teach you this new way, I'm going to have to practice it with you, because neurologically, so a good example, go get me some water. Okay, stop. That's disrespectful. Are you thirsty? Yes, thirst is the need. Okay, ask me nicely. Can you get me some water? Absolutely. I will get you water because you asked me nicely. Let's practice that. Practice, 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 because the more I practice, the more neurologically a child will learn how to get their need met with the new skill versus the maladaptive one. Now, for those of you who are working in the field, you know that this is going to take years, because children have developed maladaptive behaviors and skills so honestly based on their experience. Children we place who grew up in homes where there was a lot of sexual violence, and they use sex as a way to get their needs met. That's a maladaptive behavior to get their needs met. And we have to change to a non-sexual, to a safe behavior. Well, that doesn't occur overnight. And just because they continue with old behaviors and relapse doesn't mean that you're not doing a good job. It's going to take time to relearn neurologically new ways of behaving. So I see a kid misbehaving. I go to their body. If their body's online, I think, okay, I think we're okay. Then I move on to the next. Is there something they're struggling with? If I think, okay, there's emotionally, they seem to be okay, then let's talk about it. That's not the way we're going to do this. Let's start what is happening, and then I can do my teaching. But all of these things are occurring all the time. So what do I want to leave you with? Two things. The first one is your job is to be attuned. Your job is to spend time and just pay attention. Start paying attention to body. Start looking at the way the kids are being fed. Start looking at the way they're sleeping. Start looking at the way medication is occurring. Start looking at all that stuff. Then move into emotions. Do they have a play therapist? Are they talking to someone? If they are talking to someone, who is it? Is there safe places for them to experience emotion? And then what are the maladaptive skills that they're doing that are not working for them? And how do we teach them new skills to do that? And all three of these things have to be occurring at the same time, because that is basically neurologically parenting a child or caring for a child. For those of you who are in services, that is the approach. I can't stand parents who just want to send their kid to therapy. That's front down. That's just, I'm like, send them to therapy, but they also need to see an occupational therapist. That's body. Or they need to be in, some activities like therapeutic yoga. That's body. They need to make sure, go to their doctor. Make sure, like, do a full panel, make sure they're okay. Make sure there's not something going on. That's body. I have to do body. Emotions, make sure they're seeing a play therapist. Make sure there's a safe place for them to express the emotions. Their parents allow those opportunities. That's me attuning. And then here is what is so cool about this. All this attunement of meeting not just the frontal cortex needs, but the body needs and the emotional needs. This is the foundation for attachment. If a child comes into my world and I am meeting all of their needs, food, I'm meeting their need for all their body health, and then I'm meeting their need for their emotions, and I'm being present with them. And every time I meet their needs, that child begins to say, I can trust this guy. That guy, for some reason, he knows me. Even when I screw up, he doesn't just power over me. Yeah, he gets mad sometimes, maybe he does once in a while, but when he does, he apologizes. But that guy or that lady or that person or that probation officer or that teacher, they give me something different that makes my neurology feel at peace. It makes me feel safe. I don't experience all the shame I've experienced in my life, and I don't experience all the guilt. And there's something and the fear and the grief, like there's something about them that is creating this space. And the thing that we have the hardest time is the limbic system. That's the one that most people fail at. We make sure they're fed well and everything, and then we tell them what to do. And this is the one that most of us have to make sure that we develop. And if we do that and we give that to the people, the kids, it just solidifies relationships. It creates this, it's a non-verbal neurological connection. Basically what happens is, and we'll close with this, is when I engage my child and meet their need, what happens neurologically is neurons actually grow inside the brain of the child that's related to me. And every time I meet my child's needs, I literally am growing neurons that are related to me. My face, my smell, my touch, my sound, everything. And so in a time of need, if my child is in need and someone walks in the door, neurologically, they won't have a connection to that person. But when I walk through the door, neurologically, this child, because I have shown up over and over and over again and have built myself into their neurology, especially in times of need, that there are literally neurotransmitters that have my face, my name, physiologically in the mind of a child. I have literally built myself into the mind of the child, that now in times of need, they will attach themselves to me. They will seek me out because I have meant something neurologically extremely powerful to them. They will seek me out. Chris Rock said that the voice of a mother becomes the voice of God later in someone's life. And that's exactly right. That we have this incredible opportunity to just bless children or our kids or the kids we engage with this neurological safety that then literally becomes a neurology that's going to play out for the rest of their lives in relationships, in the way they connect to others, in the way they understand their own body and the way they take care of others. It is exponential how much power these things have. So I apologize. I think I went about a minute over, but I will stay on. Yes, I know. I wish we'd known all these things earlier. I know. I have nightmares of some of the parenting stuff I used to do early on. I remember my son he had a traumatic event, a medical event, and we got through the medical event, but he came out with sensory issues and we didn't know it. And I remember he was about 4, and he would I put his socks on him, and he just kick his socks off, kick his socks off, kick his socks off. And I remember one morning specifically where I got so mad at him. I just started spanking him because he just kept kicking his socks off. And it was horrible. It was just such a bad moment. And then later I went through Dr. Purvis's training and I learned about sensory issues. And what was happening was my son, there's these little pieces of cotton that are inside they're on the edges of socks. And because of his new sensory issues that came from his medical trauma, he was all of a sudden, he was very sensory sensitive. And so he could feel those little things in his sock and it felt really uncomfortable to him. And they made him feel so uncomfortable. And so he would rip his socks off. And so I, was seeing him as defiant, and it just breaks my heart to go back and think of, how I parented him and not understanding that, this was a body issue. And I completely misinterpreted it as just being flat out defiance. So yeah, it's very humbling. So, well, thank you so much for everybody. I think we all feel, blessed that this type of new information on how to engage kids has come out. And, and I just encourage you to continue down that journey, both for you as parents, but also for all of you who work with kids. These systems, I will say this, systems sometimes are not helpful to children when it comes to neurology. They can be very systemic, they can be very cold. And so, just as much as you can, to work through that, I just encourage you to keep doing what you're doing. So